Alrighty. All right. I want to believe it or not, my goal was not to do a live stream tonight. Believe it or not, uh, simply because I need to get started on some remixing all these tracks. I don't know how fast I can get them remixed. I'm still going to work on them after this live stream. So, but the reason why I'm coming on is because I just saw a video that said, okay, let me do a live stream and let us talk about it in my, let's talk about it. And the reason being, and if the video was talking about some of these recording studios are out of control. And I was like, okay, let me listen to it. Um, and I'm like, first of all, I'm like, whose recording studios are out of control? Um, I would love to seen some examples of some of these recording studios that are out of control, um, because simply because I don't get to see everyone's recording studio. Welcome, Spawn. Um, so on average, just don't know the way I've seen recording studios or home recording studios is just basically people that would post home recording studio tours. And um, most of, I would say, and I don't know, I lost count. It has to be thousands. Because it'll say home recording studio or epic home recording studio or my recording studio, home studio tour. And I might click on the video, and most of the time I'll just look for the ubiquitous things. You know, some people will have a home recording studio that's, this the typical, like an Argosy desk, and they'll have um, MIDI controller. They'll have their studio monitors, the basic stuff. They might have an audio interface or whatever. Then some people will have a little bit more stuff. Some people might actually have a small mixer, digital mixer. Maybe they might have an analog mixer, maybe an SSL6 mixer, maybe a Mackie or Yamaha or whatever case. I haven't seen but a few, and that are home recording studios that might have something similar to what I got, like with this 48 channel Allen Heath and a bunch of outboard gear. And then there are some recording studios that have like the top of the line, Neve console with, Universal Audio 1176s and racks full of Pultecs. I mean, everyone's budget's different, but 90% of the people I've seen home recording studios, some of them are just very basic. They have just their MIDI controller, like our Arterial Key Lab, an audio interface, a few microphones, and KRK monitors or whatever, and they're working right there in Logic on a Mac or Studio One or whatever DAW, and most of them are using plugins. That's what I've seen. And the only other difference would be they might have like some LED lighting or some, neon lighting around in the room. So that's what I've seen. So I don't know whose recording studio. And so when I was watching more of the video, it was like, well, what do you need? Well, obviously, no, well, Hearts, you're not. I just started. You're not. Like, I literally just got started. I was going to get started sooner, but I've seen a couple of videos. I was talking about some of these home recording studios out of control. So you're not late. Let me see. I can walk to a studio. It depends on your console and what's your rack. Right. Okay. So basically, I was like, who's recording studios out of control? Then it said, well, what do you need? Well, he stated the obvious, which is true for any studio. Acoustic treatment, right? Naturally, that's any room. Like, for example, in my room, my acoustic, I don't really have panels and all that because the floor is carpeted. So the room is already dead in here. And I don't have, because of the angle of my walls are angled like this. So I don't have flat parallel walls. They're angled and so forth. So believe it or not, acoustically in here, other than, the cheap phone stuff I got on the walls, that's just to help some of the high-end reflections. Other than that, it works in here. Just like my downstairs setup, I have zero acoustic treatment in my front room downstairs. But ironically, it works in there because the floor is carpeted, but it works. And plus, it's where I got my monitors set. And it's a very, very small room. This is a very small room. So as far as the gear, then you got the name, obviously, an interface. And that's of course based on anyone's budget. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. A lot of the points he said in the video was pretty obvious. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Or whatever the case. But here's the thing. Everyone seems to think, and he's in that same mindset. I'm not gonna make the assumption. Welcome, man, man network, and like I said, Warheart Arts and all that. Well, y'all, everyone, welcome. I always welcome everyone that comes in. Basically, your setup, you can't assume that if people have a recording studio in their home, they're making one genre of music. And I think the problem is these guys that sit there making, when they look at people's videos, first of all, if you've never actually physically been in that room, this person's home recording studio, if you've never been in this person's home recording studio, you can't make an assumption about the room. You can't. You've never, you don't know what it sounds like in there. You only can assume from what you're watching, on YouTube. That's the only way you can assume. It's like people they can come in here, they can watch my video and assume, oh, there ain't no way in the world that he could be, there's no way in the world in this room that he could be acoustically getting the right mixes and record. And I've proved it time and time again. When they listen to the stuff that I've done, they're like, well, yeah, the stuff sounds professional. And I made a sarcastic video a long time ago downstairs. It's called What You Won't Do for Love. I did that in the front room. I was like, yes, you can. It's about what I hear, because when I was set up in here, I didn't have my console and the speakers and monitors set up this way. I had it against the wall over there. When I first started my YouTube, I was in that corner over there. Then I moved over there. Then I moved over here. I moved over there. And I finally found the setup in this room that actually works. And the way it's set up, the console set up, the way the studio monitors are set up and all that. And I also have the ability to do white noise and all this stuff to listen to reflections and everything to make sure, okay, does that work? Whatever the case. Like, for example, part of my bookshelf right here, my table right here is acting a little bit like some diffusion. So I would never, if I look at your studio setup, and I'm not going to make an assumption just watching it through YouTube. I literally need to go to your house and listen to it and say, okay, whatever the case may be. So it really depends. And then he started talking about, that she said a lot of times that's all you really need to get, without those things, it's not a recording studio. I'm like, wrong, because a person can have a laptop, an interface with some headphones, a controller and all that, and do everything just on a laptop and use all the VST instruments, which if you use all VST instruments, all VST drums, keyboard sounds, everything, all virtual in the computer, and you just do everything in the computer, and all you do is use your interface to record your microphone. You don't need your instruments, your VST instruments do not need acoustic treatment because they're virtual. And in this day and age, the VST instruments sound almost pretty as close to real instruments anyway. And that's been the case for the last, 40 years, especially a lot of the sounds that come off of synthesizers. I've been using 90% of my sounds come off of synthesizers. They've been working, with albums since the 90s. So, like I said, it's all about, if you are going to record a live band, there's going to be things you're going to need to record a live band. First of all, 2-channel interface is not going to cut it for a live band. And there's a whole lot of stuff. So I don't know if people watch that video, but I'm like, whose studio's out of control? I'm like, I would love to see those studios. So like I said, anyhow, welcome welcome. Let me see. Once again, welcome Spawn, welcome Warheart Arts, Man Network, Matty Two Hats. Let me see, Rockport Tigger, Concrete Game, Saint Nick. Let me see who else is all on here right now. Okay, so Layback Beats Composer, welcome. Okay, so let me see. Oh man, yeah. Oh man, says yeah. Nah, Court makes all sorts of genres. Like I said, I've never. Only thing I've ever seen Colt talk about is country and western stuff and how Nashville. But I'm not gonna make an assumption because I've never met Colt. I've never been to his house or whatever the case. I'm just saying. What I'm just saying is from the. I just watched this video, and what I'm saying is it really depends. If you make EDM music, if you are making electronic music, electronic digital music, you can get away with just using Reason Studio. Reason Studio, with all the instruments in there, you do not need any acoustic treatment for any of those instruments, those virtual instruments. Zero. They're already in the software. You just got to know how to put together some song. The only thing that you're going to need acoustic treatment or anything that you're going to need to get in there is your vocals. That's the only thing. Like for me, I don't have a vocal booth in here because the room in here, I got my mic sitting on the stand, but the room in here by itself is already dead. So I don't need to have a vocal booth, But let me see. I was saying this, his Cold Capper Studio is amazing, but he's a real pro. I watched him build Atmosphere. Yeah. A lot of time, I don't think he's his own technical. Well, if it's in a house, it's technique. It's anything that's in a house, but there's been a lot of, believe it or not, you'll be amazed how many recording artists and producers and all that have home recording studios like Teddy Riley. Whitney Houston had a home recording studio in her home. George Duke, when he was alive, had a home recording. He did all his albums. He turned his garage into a professional recording studio. So it's kind of technically, well, you think about it. Let's talk about all the houses. And I'm going to go with Berry Hills in Nashville, which is Berry Hills. It's basically a subdivision area, subtown, South Nashville. That's all them houses were turned. Most of those houses were turned into recording studios. So they had to turn them into recording studios like Blackbird, Treasure Isle, Sputnik Studios with Vance Powell. Those are all partially houses. So it's kind of like, whatever case. Or the Blues House in Nashville. That's a recording studio. There's 5 of them, but they're houses on the outside. But when you walk in there, they're considered professional commercial recording studios. So it really depends. Okay. Oh yeah, man. So yeah, see, he talks about that quite a bit, a lot. I think he assumes people know that or that he's covered it many times. Okay, gotcha. So let me see what okay. My setup is headphones in a room, monitors and sub. Gotcha. Let me see, move on. I should. Gotcha. They're my room, 2 rooms. I spent 3 years in my home studio. Gotcha. Okay. So just moving on. So like I said about, it really depends on what people are trying to basically, whatever the case. Like for example, let's say you want 5 different mic pre's, even though you got one microphone, one interface. But let's say you want 5 different mic pre's, right? You may want a Neve style preamp, maybe an API preamp, maybe another vintage style preamp, or whatever the case, maybe a budget preamp or whatever. Each one of those preamps are going to give a little bit different flavor. That gives you choices and options. That's it. Really, that's all it really is. It's just giving you options, so you're not always using the same preamp. The same thing with microphones. You may have maybe an SM57 microphone. You may have a couple of condenser microphones, which are solid state microphones. You might have maybe a couple of tube microphones, maybe a couple of ribbons. those microphones are going to give you different flavors and options because microphones sound different, which gives you options. I would never tell anyone if you can, whatever, you got a lot of gear or whatever the case. Now, one thing that I think he makes, like I always said this, anything when it comes to recording studios, right, is we all love gear and recording studios. We love, whatever the case, mixing, recording, the tools, right, and all the gear. But the most important thing in any studio, I don't care what it is, who's you go to, whatever, none of that's important if the talent and the songs aren't any good. Period. You know, that's really the bulk of it. If I was, I'll use Mariah Carey. She's a Grammy Award winning artist, as an example. But if you take as talented as Mariah Carey is, but if you put her on some bad production in a bad recording studio, I'm talking about, whatever the case, she's not going to sound good. It's just not going to sound good. But if you put Mariah Carey in an amazing recording studio behind amazing engineers with amazing gear, but the production, the song, she's going to sound amazing. In other words, you put, Mariah Carey, in other words, I'm talking about solid musicians, excellent keyboard players, bass players, drummers, whatever the case. And the arrangement is, the arrangement immediately catches you the minute you hear it. And a great engineer, he puts her on any microphone, 251, I don't know, C8, C800, Sony, whatever, 67 tube or whatever. She's going to sound, the only way she won't sound good is if she's all vocally. In other words, she just, she's out of tune or whatever, out of key. But other than that, that's what makes any artist. I don't care who it is, Stevie Wonder, anyone, when Houston was alive, any great artist. So, we get so wrapped up with 1176s and LA2As and Pultecs and distressors and all that. None of that matters if the talent of the artist sucks, so let me see. But I just want to talk about that. Sometimes people, what do you need in your recording studio? You need the tools that's going to get the job done. And I know that's really what it is. I'm not going to talk about the obvious stuff like acoustic. That's obvious. Acoustic treatment is obvious. Needing an interface. I think by now I wouldn't insult anyone's intelligence with a microphone and keep telling people they need a microphone or an interface. I think 90+% of people that either already doing this at home or recording studios or whatever know that. Some people they might be deciding, let's say they bought a whatever interface, maybe they want to get something better or whatever. That's the kind of stuff they want to know. That's what people want to know. Or maybe they may not know which microphone or even the polar pattern that's set in the microphone. Most of the time, 9% of the time, in the polar pattern, if a microphone is capable of that, is setting in a cardio pattern. Some people put in figure eight or whatever the case. Or should I use a tube microphone? Should I use a solid state microphone? Should I use a ribbon microphone? Should I use a dynamic microphone? And that's somebody, well, I got this, whatever the case, I got this tube microphone. It's an MXL tube microphone. But should I get maybe an AKG C414 solid state microphone, whatever the case? That's where you starts to make some differences. So let me move on. Let me submit a few more comments. So let me see. Oh yeah, like Layback Beats says, if you have a clean recording, then all you need is a good engineer to mix and master your songs. If you don't know how to do it yourself, naturally, you're right. So that's what the front end, a good recording is key, right? So then let's see, Paul McCartney, Joe Elliott. Right, exactly. That's right. Man, that's right. Paul McCartney, Phil Collins, Joe Elliott. I mean, there are lots of, because what was happening is, you think about it, these artists that sign record contracts, a lot of these recording artists that sign contracts started with, we'll go back 30 to the 80s, and we'll go to the 80s, 90s, maybe even the 70s, where home recording studios were not a common thing like it is today. People had them, but not to the fact, most people, if you had a home recording studio, you may just had a 4-track, look like a cassette player that can do 4 tracks. And that's about as much as you can afford, because you couldn't afford a 16 or 24 track Studer or whatever. So, and then a big console and a bunch of outboard gear. So most people had to, when they got a record deal, had to go to like Sunset Sound, or Electric Lady, or the Criteria, which is the Hit Factory. They were going to one of those type of recording studios, period. But as they start making money from touring and their records started selling, and they start making money, they could do like what Prince did. Prince didn't have Paisley Park at first. He had to go to Sunset Sound and other recording studios like that before he could actually make enough money to build Paisley Park. So that is very, very true. Warhart says, my living room or my recording studio is odd proportion, some semi-open living room from far from my. But the thing is, on where it doesn't matter if it's oddly proportioned. What matters is if it's working. I've seen even commercial studios that you would think, whatever. Like, for example, let's take a look at Blackbird's recording studio, right? Or let's look at East West or Larrabee Studio. If you haven't, you can do a YouTube, watch a tour of those studios. Then go look at Studio 1979, Chris Mari's studio. The way his set up, Chris Mari doesn't have a tall, high ceiling like United Ways recording studio, or East West, where they have tall. He doesn't. His control room is upstairs. He's using, so now the thing is recording on 1979, is it getting the results? I'm pretty sure it's working, so that's what really matters. So like I proved in here, doing recordings in here, people they're looking here like, dude, your room is so cluttered. How do you make it? But then they listen to the recordings like, oh, yeah, it is working. So let's see. Let me say, Mr. Man, y'all, these comments come in fast so I can read them. So let me see. So let me go on. Let me see. I missed a whole bunch of comments. Let's see. Okay. Let me see. Okay. Layback says, what DAW do I use to mix? I use several DAWs. So if I'm in Studio One, that the DAW that I record in is also the same DAW that I mix. Same thing with Cakewalk, because I don't mix in a DAW. I mix on a console. So when I'm up here, everything's coming through this console. So, and I'm using the outboard gear. 90% of the time up here, I'm using the outboard, and I'm mixing through the console. So, but the recording and everything is done in the DAW I'm using, and I use Reaper. I use several DAWs. So, and of course, let me see. Do I hear I hear bass, and I think my neighbor's driving by. So, oh man, said Prince lived in Sunset Sound. Does it make it a home studio? Well, believe it or not, Prince is not the only artist who ever done that. Recording studios is still a business, right? So if you are a multi-platinum selling artists, I would use like I'll use like ACDC. If ACDC, because they sold millions of albums, if ACDC wanted to live, let's say they were recording at the record plant in Sausalito, right, in California, they will make accommodations because they're paying $2,000 to $3,000 a day, but their budget allows them to pay $2,000 to $3,000 a day. The recording studio is not going to care. They are not going to care. If they live there, they want to sleep. This is the reason why some recording studios even have sleeping accommodations. I've seen even overseas, some recording studios, you'll go in there and they have bedrooms for the artists to go to sleep in, so they have kitchens and whatever case, and they can go outside and lounge outside. Some of these recording artists, they're there for months. So I guess that would be a home recording studio temporarily. But let me see. Awar says I use Cubase. No, I use Cakewalk, but I do have Cubase. I use them all really. But the only one I've never really worked in was Pro Tools. I just didn't want to pay for Pro Tools. Excellent DAW, of course, naturally was considered industry standard. Just I didn't, because I never thought that you had to have Pro Tools to get the job done. You can use Cakewalk. I've proven that. You can use Studio One, Logic Pro, Reaper, Mixcraft, Harrison Mixbus. There's DAWs are, so let me see. Going back to my room. Like I said, Warhearts, if it works, it works. I've seen recording studios. Like I said, I've seen even commercial recording studios that you're looking at like, how in the world? But if it works, it works. Spawn says Pro Tools all day, baby. Yeah, like I said, Pro Tools, Pro Tools been around since the early 90s. So, but there's, if you know what you're doing, any DAW works, right? So let me see. War says I usually mix dollars here, and there are studios like, believe it or not, there are studios right now that still record console, tape machine. They do it the way it used to be done. There are recording studios like that. There's some recordings that still use console, outboard gear instead of a tape machine. They use is Radar, which is a hard disk recording system. There's no one way to get it done, because in the end, we all know that the music that's put out there, people don't know to ask questions about how things are done. It's like if you go by and you buy your car, you're not going to ask, oh man, who put the fifth gear in my transmission? You don't care. As long as fifth gear works, that's all you care about. You don't, oh man, who installed the pistons in my, you don't care about that. Yeah, did they use Clevite, chromoly rings on my piston? No, you don't care. You don't ask. You just, does the car run? So Matthew says, if it's too busy, Mark, you don't have to read all the comments. We're here to gotcha. Yeah, like I said, I just screened through some of these comments. So yeah, I don't read I just kind of, unless something pops up that catches my attention. So, Reaper won the KVR People's Choice Award. What I like about Reaper is how I can customize it. You can go down to Reaper themes and change it to make it the way and if you're really good at graphics and all that, you can design Reaper to make it look like anything you want if you're good at graphics and stuff like that. But that's what I like about Reaper. But in the end, to me, it's more about functionality, getting things done the way the way I like. So. My bad, Cakewalk. Yeah. I mean, but I do use Cubase. I do use that as well. But Cakewalk is probably because I know it so well. It's the reason why if I got a project and I want to get started, Cakewalk is because I've been using Cakewalk since the 90s, since 95. So I know it like that. That's why I can get into it. That's like with anyone that uses Pro Tools. If you know Pro Tools, you can get started like that because, like I say, anything you know it, you can do things quick. So, um, but moving on. Let me see going on. So, okay, got you on. Okay, so moving on to about, like I said, this is about what do you need in your recording studio. It's kind of like what do you want to do. If you're going to record a band and you want, let's say, for example, some people might want to record a band and it might own, and it's all about budget. And you'll notice, like, for example, even these commercial studios don't even, some of them don't even have Blackbird's budget. Like Blackbird has 9 live room and control rooms. 9. Even United Way in Los Angeles didn't have that many control rooms. See, I think he's only had 2 or 3, maybe 4. Now, I think the only other recording studio that has that many control room and live rooms would be like The Village. I think they had like 8. East West has about 4. But he has a lot of live room and control rooms, as well as pretty much every piece of gear you can think of. And I'm like, whatever case. But here's the one thing, and I've watched Blackbird's tours. The one thing he don't have, and he said, well, the only thing I don't have a lot of is synths. And I'm like, because 90%, when I used to watch a lot of these recording studios, a lot of them, and they would say, well, they would sit there and I'm a synth player. I'm a synth player. That's my number one thing that I do is I'm a keyboard player, right? And when I go into these recording studios and I would see they always usually have some sort of acoustic piano, like an upright or grand. They may have a Hammond organ, and they might have like a Wurlitzer or Fender Rhodes. And I'm like, well, none of them are going to work for the music that I do, because a piano only makes one sound, a piano sound, right? Organ, I can manipulate the drawbars because I play organ every week, at church. So I play in Hammond at church every week, right? So, and then as far as Fender Rhodes, well, Fender Rhodes only pretty much make a Fender Rhodes sound, right? But for the music that I do, I use synthesizers like my Korg Kronos, my Roland Phantom, and so forth. Everyone knows I got about 20 synthesizers, and those synthesizers have sounds for days, right? I might want to use a sound wave, like a string pad, whatever the case. Well, none of those instruments are going to have it. That's why I don't understand. I would love to get with John as much money as John McBride has spent at Blackbird. I don't understand why you don't have, I guess because a lot of the keyboard players bring their own rigs. So I guess he figured, like, well, I don't need to buy those because those keyboard players bring their own rigs. But I'm like, you're providing all the drums, right? He's got drum sets for days, right? He's got guitars for days. He's got bass guitars for days. So if you're providing that, I don't understand why he don't have Roland Phantoms and Tritons and Korg Kronoses, and he could have, those boards, the latest Yamaha Montage M8 or whatever the case. You might as well provide that too if you're going to provide everything. That's just my thought on it, because that's what I have up in here. I have, so it just depends. Some people say, well, he's like, well, I want to make sure that if a music can come here and he can start making music. Well, like I said, you can't make the assumption that now he does have, like I say, he has all the other, when I go to I see a lot of recording studios that have pianos and organ. He has that. But I don't, you would think synthesizers, because a lot of music, especially certain genres, use a lot of sounds from synthesizers, like Roland Phantoms. So, but anyhow, moving on. So let's see. Oh, Jerry says I use Cakewalk too. Jeffrey, sorry, Jeffrey. I use Cakewalk. Yeah, this is like I don't know if people that are not hip to maybe people, because Cakewalk has been around for a long time. So some people, because it's been around and it's been through its, ownership, whatever changes and all that. Some people have, they started doing this later on. They started using Mixcraft 9 or they got into Harrison Mixbus or different dolls, and they never really saw what Cakewalk can do or never got interested in it. But Cakewalk is a very powerful DAW. So especially that pro channel. But anyhow, moving on. So naturally, like I said, going back to what he was saying in the video initially was, what do you need? And it just got back into the basics that most people already knew. So so let me see. Moving on. Let me see. Oh, geez, a man says, John told me he doesn't buy them because he doesn't understand what players want out of them. He will rent specific ones when people okay. Once again, okay, and the reason why I'm saying that, if you think about, I'm gonna go back to, I'm gonna use R&B music. I'm gonna use producers like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. I'm gonna use Chucky Booker, Dallas Austin, Teddy Riley, all these big time R&B producers. Then there's tons more, including people like myself that are synthesizer heavy. The reason why you don't understand that is because if you think about, we're in Nashville, which is basically country and western heavy. What are the main instruments in country and western music? Drums, right? Bass guitar, fiddle, steel guitar, electric guitar, and so forth. Every now and then, or there's blues being recorded here. So what do most blues players use? An organ, maybe a Fender Rhodes, maybe some popular music where they're using a grand piano, right, on the track. But most of the basics, the three that's going to always be used for the most part: drums, bass guitar, electric guitar, right? If you listen to R&B music as an example, you're going to hear, I would if I start naming groups, like I'll go to like Intro. I'll start using, groups like Portrait. All these 90s R&B, they're synthesizer heavy. If I go into like Sounds of Blackness, that, by Optimistic, Sounds of Black, Optimistic, right, by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Or I listen to a lot of Janet Jackson, Rhythm Nation, or whatever. Because let's go back to the 80s where there was Alexander O'Neal and all these army artists and all those heavy synthesizer sounds. So my question is, you don't understand it, why they're used for, because you don't listen to that genre of music. That's all that is. Because if you listen to that genre of music, you would know in R&B music, especially 80s, 90s, is heavy synthesizer. And those are sounds coming from like Proteuses, and I got the Proteus 1 and 2 down there, and those type of instruments, those were number one hits in the 90s. So how can you not understand that? Because once again, your ideal clients that were coming to your recording studio were mostly blues, maybe some jazz, maybe some rock, or maybe country, which does not require a lot of synthesizers. I would say, matter of fact, there's few rock groups that use synthesizers, like maybe Europe, with Final Countdown, which has heavy synth, or maybe even when Van Halen experimented with Jump, with synthesizers. Other than that, so that to me, like I said, I like Blackbird, but that's kind of a cop out. Sorry. If you're going to cater your studio, the whatever the case, and you're going to, that's just me. But so welcome, deal. No, you. I'll see. Uh, um, welcome. So like I said, was getting back to, and I like I said, I like Blackbird. I think I like Blackbird Studio. I've been there. Um, but to be able to provide everything else and have not use the excuse that I said, well, you know, if you want to be catered to every typical genre, you might want to throw in a few cents in there. At least have a couple of montages, some Chronuses, some even a Nord. I'm not a big Nord guy, but at least have a Nord stage 4. You know, $30 million studio, you can't afford a $3,000 synthesizer like a Nord, or have a Korg Chronus or something modern like that. That's all. Okay, moving on. Not gonna be a dead horse. So welcome Green Ray. Do I think the SSL G Bus Comp 500 is worth $1,500? Well, with the I'm going to say this, and this is just personal opinion, my personal opinion on this, because the clone companies like Stem Audio, Warm Audio, and so forth are making bus compressor clones. You can probably get the Warm Audio bus compressor for $699 and get the same results. So, but unless you if you got the budget for an SSL G compressor and you got the money for it, yeah, why not? But do you think that, having the SSL or maybe the Stem Audio version, that's a matter of trial and error? Do I think you have to have the SSL one? Probably not. Welcome, Dave. Like I said, we're just talking about recording studios. I'm just talking about recording studios and what you need in it, because like I said, it was found from watching the video. So let's see. I said Royal Orbison wouldn't appreciate Van Halen's guitar riff. I don't know. Eddie Van Halen, when he was alive, to me, Eddie got a lot of criticism, but I'm sorry, listen to Van Halen's, listen to the solo and the Eruption. Just listen to Van Halen as a guitarist. I'm sorry, but Eddie Van Halen, this is just my opinion as a guitarist. I think Eddie Van Halen's probably one of, rest in peace, was in the top 10 baddest rock guitarists of all time. That's just my opinion. No, I don't got nothing against, I forget the name of his name, from AC/DC and all the, what's his name? They used to play with Guns N' Roses, Slash, and all these other guitar players. If we get into, we start getting into, the top 10, but really there's probably thousands. I guarantee somebody that's watching my channel right now that's a guitar player, probably ranked, probably as good as some of these top, I would go Lenny Kravitz, or I would go, some of the top, George Benson, and so forth. But Eddie was just a beast. So when he created his EVH line, which I've seen, I mean, that rig alone is part of what gave Eddie his sound. He's called his guitar Frankenstein. He built this. He put a bunch of guitars together, made his own, called the Frankenstein. But you got to give Eddie Head credit. Just listen to what he done on, and not just him playing guitar on his own with his own band Van Halen, but just just like the guitar player, he died in a plane crash in the 90s. Steve Ray Vaughan. You know, we hear him, because it's I thought that was David Bowie at first in the video, Let's Dance, and he's sitting there, Let's Dance. He's doing, he looked like he's playing because David Bowie plays guitar. But then it's like, no, that's Stevie Ray Vaughan playing. I said, no wonder, because Stevie Ray Vaughan had a unique technique, when he played. So moving on. Let's see. Man says you don't need any special acoustically treated room to record D keys, right? Or synths. Most producers I know, including me, spend a day of those just resting. It's like if I have a synthesizer and I have, let's say I have an interface with, inputs on it. The cleanest signal is to record it directly, plug directly into the interface. That's going to give you the cleanest sound. Because all the sounds in your synthesizers are least stereo. So string patches are going to be the most effective if you record into your DAW in stereo, because there's stuff oscillating. It gives you this ambient thing that the string patches are doing that are programmed in the synthesizer into your DAW instead of recording just a mono signal. So let's see. But for me, I do have a little bit, which can create some noise. If I go from the keyboards directly, going to my patch, which goes to the, through the patch bay, through the console, then into the DAW, it can be a little bit of noise. So I got to, watch my noise floor when I'm recording synths, because that once you record noise, it's hard. You can't undo it, So let's see. Going to Warhard, he says, considering I have no 500 chassis, SSL bus is not for me at this time. Gotcha. And then like me, I don't have any SSL bus, whatever case. I am looking at a bus compressor, but I'm just up in the air about it right now. An actual hardware unit, because I'm always using the SSL bus compressor plugin. So yeah. Let's see. Is the warm audio bus from what I've heard, is the warm bus compressor close enough? From what I've heard, a lot of people that have them have zero complaints about those warm audio bus compressors. I thought of looking at it too. So I would definitely, if you got the budget to buy the warm audio, I think it's $7.99 or something like that. Whatever the cost is, yes, I would definitely invest in it. So let's see. Let's see. All right, let's see. Okay. Oh, yes. Yeah. Warhard says Nord seems pretty nice. Let me tell you the reason why I don't have Nords. Okay. I'll talk about Nord keyboards really quick because I'm a keyboard player. I think Nord keyboards, I think the sounds on them are super amazing, right? Their piano sounds, their organ sounds, a lot of their synth sounds. Here's my issue with Nord. Let's say I'm going to use a Nord, then I'll use like a Yamaha Montage as an example. The new Nord Stage 4 is about $5,999 or basically or $59.99, basically $6,000. It can't do any sequencing. It can't sample. It has no drum sounds in it. It can only layer up to 6 sounds, and so forth. Amazing board, but you can go and spend, I would say, $3,500, get a Yamaha Montage M7. Not only is it sounds just as good, but also you can layer up to 16. It's got performance mode. It can sequence. You can do sample. You can, just the functions for what you're paying, whatever the case. The functionality of spending that kind of money and not, the Nord can't do half of what the Montage can do. It's the reason why I'm not a Nord person. I'm not going to spend, because it's a Nord, to spend twice the price and only get half of the options. My Roland Phantom EX can do 10 times more than a Nord, any Nord. That's the reason why. So So it doesn't have, it's like, but people are buying because they see people got them. And I'm like, no, that's not, that makes no sense to me. I'm not spending $6 grand on a Nord. I got, when I got my Roland Phantom, I'm like, no, my Nord can't do half of what my, no. So that's the reason why. That's my short thing on the Nords. So Warhol says EVH was a goat. He just, Eddie Van Halen was just a beast, you know. So um just really, you know. Oh, Quad AG says mic placement is key depending on the room. That's especially, like anything, that was one of the key things to, I would go back to mic placement. I'll use that at, like, for example, I would go with let's go with Al Schmidt when he's alive. Believe it or not, that was part of Al Schmidt's EQing and everything, was just he would move the mic, place it exactly till he got the sound that he want, just moving the mic, exactly where he wanted. He knew what kind of mic. But here's another thing, that this is one thing that, when we talk about Al Schmidt and engineering and all that, right? And certain microphones, let's say whether you're going to use a Royer 121 ribbon, right? Or I'm going to use a FET 47, or I'm going to use Neumann M49 or whatever mic you're using, Neumann U87 or whatever, and wherever that's placed. But another thing, let's say Al Schmidt was known for recording big bands for Capitol Studios, just like with Air Studios that record a lot of, orchestras and Air Studios in London, right? One of the things that's going to make those recordings sound well is because the musicians are coming there with, most of those are professional musicians that have top-notch sounding instruments. So, your violinists and your violas and your cellos and your trumpet players. I mean, like your trumpet player, I'm a trumpet player. This first instrument I started on, they're coming in with Bach Stradivarius trumpets. These are $3,000 horns. So they're not using a traditional, they're using different, better, higher quality mouthpieces and all that. Same thing with, they're not using a Bundy Stoughton horn. They're using a top-notch sounding, high quality $4,000 saxophone as an example. So that's going to definitely be caught. You have a really good microphone placed right on that instrument or that guitar cabinet or whatever, because the guitar player, he might be using a tube, let's say a high quality tube guitar amp, but also the guitar player, he probably has better tuners, better higher quality strings, better pickup. The guitar itself, $3,000. That's going to matter in the recording. And on top of that, the guitar player himself is, or whatever, the musician, whatever, is some of the best in the business. All that's going to make a difference in the recording, along with the mic placement. And of course that's going through high quality preamps like a Neve 1073 or 1081. Maybe a Burr Brown. Is maybe the console's been, they took out the original op amps and put like Burr Brown op amps or whatever. All these little things like that to capture the recording. So, oh, the man says Nord cost a fortune compared to other options. They sound great, but exactly. It's like I can go get my Korg Kronos right now, and a Nord's not going to blow that away. Of course, the Kronos is Korg's flagship brand, is the Kronos. It's just not. So DS, are there any unfamous gear brands that make great gear? There, believe it or not, there is. The list is actually long when it comes to like, for example, I would say, like, for example, we always talk about Neumann and Telefunken, right? But there is Soyuz, there is I got a book list. It's hundreds of microphone companies out there, or Um, for example, I just saw Dave says I have a Tigler Cream and a West Audio Dion. They both are excellent G bus style compressor. That there you go, right there. Two brand names right there, with the Tigler, because you don't see a lot of Tiglers in racks. You just don't. But they're great pieces of gear. So if that makes sense. So let's see. Man says, oh, it says, man says, I sound like a hypocrite owning loads of gear, but I make a living with it. Yeah, well, that's what you're supposed to. Like if you're running this is on the studio business portion of it, right? If you have a professional commercial recording studio and you're bringing lots of clients, especially if they're bringing their engineers or whatever. Well, how recording studios get a lot of business is basically they're advertising what they have, so the engineers know what they have to use. So they'll say, okay, let's say I have a recording studio, and they say, well, I have an API legacy console, and they say, okay, good, okay, that's what I'm looking for, or Triton 68 or 78 or whatever, Triton, whatever. Or I have a SSL, which is probably the most universal, and SSL's 4000E or 6000G or whatever. Or I got a recording studio that has a Neve vintage 8058 or whatever. So, and they'll look and say, okay, well, what outboard gear you got? What microphones you got? What preamps are we dealing with and stuff like that. That's how they're booking them. Because they know what kind of results they're looking for, and they know. So if you do it as a living, you want to give your clients options. They want to know what kind of microphones you got and so forth. So, so let me see. Oh, Matthew says, oh, okay, he's complimenting Warhearts. Gotcha. Okay. Warhearts is, but infamous. You mean boutique? Yeah, it's just vintage boutique, or, so. Oh, so HRK long was one of Rupert. Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Okay, gotcha. Okay. So I've seen, like I said, I never got a chance to get my hand on any Tigler pieces of gear. I've seen them, but so forth. Dave says Dogman mics have $100 off coupon right now for, I think their Newman, their U87 clone was $6.99, might be $5.99 if you're looking for that U87 sound microphone. But there's, of course, there's STEM Audio makes their 87, Warm Audio makes their 87, and so forth. So let me see. Well, that is probably that's a very accurate statement. Maddie says people expect brand names when they are paying for studios, but at home we don't have to care so much about that. Yeah, most home recording studios are not bringing in Justin Timberlake as their client. They're not. So, so like I said, I was going back to the heart of what I was saying about the video that I watched about, about these studios and so forth. And really, it's more, like I said, I would never prejudge anyone's studio, because it's all about the end result. I think I've seen one recording studio. This guy was doing a recording studio, and he had it almost looked like the room was really, really cramped. He had drums in there, everything in this really, really small room. But when I listened to the tracks, Um, you know, I was impressed. I was like, okay. So really it's about the end result, right? So that's all it's really about is the end result. Um, so you know, um, this is my mom calling. So let me um let me text her. I'm gonna call her right back. Uh, um, so let's see. Oh, Dave says they have a 6747 tube and a FET style. Yep. Yes. Oh, you're talking about for document. Yep. There's so many microphone companies out there. Um, it's unheard of. It's the I mean, just like there's so many preamps and compressors and yep. Oh, it's a mom. Yeah, that's my mom. So I got it. Um, so I had a I'm not gonna make this a jury thing, but I had a friend of mine that I grew up with. He just passed away, and I just sent her the alert because she didn't hear about it. So that's what she's calling me about. So uh, I don't want to bring everyone down, but yeah, that was one of my, he was one of my. Um, I grew up with him. We hung out as buddies. But yeah, I just got the news, so I'm gonna get on the phone with her, and so I appreciate it. Thank you. So man, so sorry about that. Yeah. So so all I'm gonna say, because that's really what I want to thank you. Um thank you. I appreciate all the support. Um all I'm gonna say when it comes to gear, because you buy gear and it's very, you buy gear for what you need, right? In your recording studio, like me, because gas, which is gear acquisition syndrome, is a real thing, right? Um, I want to have different flavors. I don't want to always use, for example, my Avalon for vocals, as an example. I might want to try my Universal 610 on vocals. I just like to have different options. The same thing with compressors, same thing with EQs. Um, so if someone has a lot of gear, it just because it's the same thing with recording studios. When you walk in a recording studio, you can go to Blackbird, you can go into East West, you can go into um, or whatever case. You do not have to have, just because they have a Fairchild 670 doesn't mean you have to use it. Or if they got a Manley massive passive EQ, just because they got one doesn't mean you have to use it. It's just an option for the engineer, right? Or they had an LA2A. You might not want to use an LA2A on vocals. You might want to use an LA3A on vocals. It's an option. This is what John always talk about when he's talking about just having colors to paint the palette. That's all he's talking about. Just having choices of gear that's going to get your result. That's all he's saying. That's for every recording studio. The only option that most people are not going to have an option when you go in these commercial studios is the console that they selected. So if they have an API or Neve or an SSL that's in there and everything's routed through that console, that flavor console is what you're stuck with, unless you go to a different room where they got a different console if it ain't booked. Because some people book, you can have all the same outboard gear in one control room, but the difference in one control room to another control room may be the console. You might go in one control room and they have an SSL, you go in another control room and they have an API. Another control room, they have a Trident. Another control room, they got an MCI. Another control room, they got a Helios, and so forth. You get the idea. And you might want to get the Triton flavor. So It's the same thing with me. The only option I don't have, when I'm going through this out, is because it's an Allen Heath. So the Allen Heath flavor is going to be on part of my mixes. That's just part of it. And that's unless I just don't go through the Allen Heath, unless I just mix completely in the box, which can happen too. But I like the sound of what comes out of my Allen Heath. That's just me. So let's see. Like I said, thanks everyone for the support. Let's see. Scott Gray says, what do I think about using the Yamaha MG16FX as a main mixer? Using a Trident Studio. Good keyboard. Love that keyboard. Got mine over there. Boss DR670 and mixing vocals. I don't think there's nothing wrong with it at all. I think you'll be perfectly fine using a Yamaha mixer. I think you'll be, like I said, the only thing with those mixers like that, anything is because a lot of times they have fixed band EQs. Most of the time, the high is fixed at 12K. Usually the mid is fixed at 2500 and the low is fixed about 100. But if you can deal with the fixed EQs, but I've always noticed that the sonics, even with a mixer like that, tends to make everything sound a little bit warmer, more analog, a little bit warmer using any mixer other than just coming out of your interface by itself. That's what I've noticed. So every setup I got some sort of mixer to help give it a little bit more. That's just me. So, man says the home studios. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. Home studios are about the end product. Commercial studios are about the options, speed, and the end result, right? And it's kind of like, and really, believe it or not, most home recording studios, for what people are doing, you pretty much today, the only thing that you really can't get in a home recording studio that you have to get at a commercial studio is the room sound. But then there are some recording studios, let's say you want Sunset Sound's room sound, where they've made plugins now. You implement the plugins to get, like, for example, Sunset Sound, which I have the IK Multimedia studio pack. So I have the Sunset Sound room sounds. So I wanted to get Sunset Sound's recording studio with that room sound. And a lot of recording studios, the Air Studios have their room sounds and a plug-in. Blackbird's doing it. So many recording studios are doing it now to get their. So I would say if you want to get a mixture of getting some of their room sound, get the plugins as well. Oh yeah, man says almost all my child friends are gone. I'm at 30s. Yes, yeah. Drugs is that's the number one killer for anything. Drugs in any profession. I don't care what it is. Dave says West Audio has proven they will support the units with software updates. It's almost like with West Audio's. I've been eyeballing some West Audio gear. I've been eyeballing some of their West Audio gear. Okay, gotcha. You appreciate it. You're welcome. Just put the room on your mix. Like I said, anything, whether using gear, plugins, or whatever, the only way to really see how things work is to try it and see if you like it. If you don't like it, first make sure you know how to use it first. And if you know how to use it and it doesn't work, then don't use it. That's all I can say. So that's all I can say. Just, it's kind of like you hear, let's say, a vocal chain. I'm going to use let's say the common vocal chain. I'm going to use a 47, going through a 1073, then through a Tube Tech compressor. And like, well, that's a good vocal chain. Well, it may not work on certain vocalists. A 47 by itself might not work. You might need something someone has a really dark sounding voice, you might want to use a little bit brighter mic, like a 251, and then maybe the 1073 doesn't work. You might want to use a different preamp, or maybe you don't want to use that 1070. Maybe I need to use a API 312 preamp on this vocal. You have to try and see how things work. And go from there. It's kind of like that's why I have two of the Warm Audio Tone Bs, which are basic API style preamps. So I have some Neve style preamps. I have some API preamps. I also have Universal Audio 610 preamp. I also have the Avalon. My number one vocal mic preamp is the Avalon, but I've tried it with the other ones. They all, believe it or not, you'll be surprised how good the MPA Pro 2 on vocals. They really actually, that's, and it has an impedance setting on it, but you'll be amazed how good that preamp sounds with vocals. And that's an affordable, it's a 2-channel, it's a stereo, it has 2 preamps in a rack. It's a really, that's a really, just like I use the Pro MP, I use the VLA compressors in the rack. So Art's one of those companies that it's kind of like with Lindell Audio and the Art. Those are like hidden gems, in my opinion, when it comes to some gear. So Art has been doing some, so if you're looking for some affordable gear that works well, look at some of the Art stuff. Scott says, let me go before. Let's see, going back to, let me see. Okay, okay, guy. So Scott asked me, what was your first big board? The first board that I could afford, believe it or not, the first board I ever got, I got this Behringer. It was low end. Then I actually got another Behringer, was the MX8000. Then of course I got the Allen Heath. I've had this Allen Heath, I don't know how long now, years. Now the first big board I've ever worked on was a Tascam M520. And then got to go into a recording studio where they had it was the Atari Concept 1. And then I've been in recording studios, of course, naturally. Then eventually I got to work being a recording studio that had an SSL and an Neve. But as the board I've ever owned, as far as I've always had this Allen Heath. Now, had I known, I got this board really, really cheap. But the board I wanted to get, and I think it was about $2,500, was a 40-channel AMEC, which is basically a Rupert Neve design type of console. For $2,500, it was a 40-channel, and I was gonna pull the trigger on it, and then of course I never did. So of course it got sold, but yeah. So, oh yes, man says our MPA has been on some big. It's a good preamp. That's a really good preamp. If someone wants a preamp they can afford and not be disappointed with, I would look at those Art MPAs. I got 2 of them in the rack down there. Let's see. So let's see. Oh, say inappropriate. Gotcha. Layback beats composed. Can you sample cable? Here's the thing. I guess technically, if you're recording audio, whether you're sampling on a sampler on your, where I'm sampling on my my Triton Studio or my Roland Phantom, you're sampling. Well, it's basically pulling audio. Then you could chop it up and do everything you want with the sample. So technically, you can do the same thing in Cakewalk, if that makes sense. If you record a CD or whatever. But usually when we sample on the keyboard, we hit, we sample the neck, I hit the keys and play it back or whatever, or hit the pads and play it back or whatever. Cakewalk, you literally have to hit the play button and play it back or whatever. So I don't know if it's kind of yes or no. Um, so, but for sampling, I usually don't use sampling. If I want to sample something, I don't usually use Cakewalk. I usually go sample into the MPC. I got an MPC Renaissance here, so I sample into the MPC software for the DAW. If I'm not sampling on my keyboard, I usually, for the computer, I use the MPC. So if that makes sense, I do very, very, very little sampling. Because I just, it's a thin line when you start sampling and you between that and copyright. I just rather, if I like a drum sound snare, I might sample that. That's about it. But other than that, I gotta be careful with sampling. But I'm going to do most of it. I know that was a long answer, but I'm generally going to do that in my MPC. So, oh, gotcha. Yeah, he said I wouldn't be here without him on the arts. Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Let's see, Matthew said, I tell you what I have found interesting. I can hear compression a bit better when I use hardware versus a plugin. Is that a weird thing? No. That's if you have a trained ear, you should be able to hear the different. You will definitely hear the compression more with a real unit over a plugin, even though you can hear compression in the plugin. Matter of fact, if you had a trained ear, you'll hear hardware altogether over plugins. Here's the thing, and I'll say this, and I'll keep it simple. Plugins, they're good. They work extremely well. Plugins do. The key factor that what plugins lack that Real Gear has is because Real Gear, what makes the sound is the electronics. So it's kind of like, you got to remember, plugins are an emulation. That's all it is emulation of a real piece of gear. It's just the emulation of it. How close they've gotten better with the modeling of plugins to gear. They've gotten a ton better where now it's extremely hard to hear the difference. But the key factor to real pieces of gear is actually because that sound signal is going through some op amps, is going through capacitors, resistors. If there's a tube and transformer in a circuit or whatever the case, whatever the case may be, that's the difference. That's why some people said, there's one person, I think he was on here a long time ago, I'd rather use a real piece of gear than C++. So, and everyone knows, if you understand, coding and all that, that's really, because your Mac or PC doesn't have transformers and tubes and op amps in it. It's just software. So this is the reason why I can hear if I sit there and record vocals through an actual Avalon, whatever case, or an actual one of my preamps using one of my microphones coming through a console, even though, and I wanted to make sure I had really, really good converter. That's why I bought the Antelope Orion, because that's a high-end converter. It's like I got Mark of the Unicorn Motu converters. I've got some Motus downstairs. I got some Motus right here, but I have the Antelope Orion. Really great converters going through an analog console using outboard. This is the reason I can hear. So that's just me. Now, can you do all this with software and just using VST instruments and plugins? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can use simply, especially if you're mixing, you can absolutely use a lot of plugins. Plugins work. And you got a lot of, y'all pray for Dave Pensado. Dave Pensado has Alzheimer's now. So he's sick. But his channel was genius for showing you how to do things with plugins. So yes, And there's a lot of engineers that use plugins. Even Crystal Algae have started using more plugins. Sylvia Massey uses plugins. Michael Breyer uses plugins. Manny American uses plugins. Greg Wells uses plugins. So plugins is a very common thing. But like I said, the key thing, especially out of all of it, that really shines in your recordings is preamps. Out of all of it, if I, you can get away with EQ plugins, compressor plugins, reverb plugin, delay plugins, and all these other plugins to do your mixing and effects and all that. But preamps, an actual real preamp, yeah. So with a really good mic, that's where you're going to really, especially in your front end. So let's see. Okay, gotcha. Oh yeah, man was yep, appreciate yep. That's he's just really there. Yeah, software doesn't hold making great records. Okay. Okay, yeah, well, computer tolerance, yeah. Because you think about it, you want a good, that's why Mac came up with the M1, M2, the higher quality processing, because what was holding people back to really make plugins shine was the limitations of the PC or Mac, because it couldn't handle the processing. And of course, if your computer can't handle the process, because you think about your PC or Mac, not only is it trying to process the plugins and the DAW and all the audio and the instruments in the DAW, it's still trying to run the video card. It's still trying to run the operating system. So that CPU is working. So, but now the computers and PCs and Mac are getting tons better. So now it's not overworking the RAM and the CPU. So moving on. So man, sir, if y'all think you're going to buy analog, get some really good preamps and some really good mic. Yeah, exactly. He just iterated what I just said again. If out of all of it, if you're going to buy gear and you're going to say, well, I can't afford 10,000 compressors and EQs and so forth. Anything, a really good interface, with some really good mic pre's and some really good mics out of all of it. And out of all of it. Because like I said, with the, you don't have to have outside synthesizer. You can use virtual instrument. I don't hear any difference between my Triton Studio that I got over here and the Triton Studio from the Core Collection. I have the software and they sound identical. So that you'll be perfectly fine if you use VST instruments. But for vocals, or if you're going to redo some analog recording, like record guitars, acoustic guitars, some really good mics, some really nice mics with some really nice mic pre's, is going to really capture that really well. So, and let's see. Scott is asking me, do I have any experience with those Focusrite ISA 1 pre? I do not. I've never owned one. I've been eyeballing the Focusrite ISA 430 because it's a channel strip. I really just to try the Focusrite sound, because I watched the Focusrite console. There's a thing on YouTube, and Jack Pewitt was the Grammy Award-winning mixing engineer, was working on the Focusrite console. They only, it was a Rupert Neve design console. They only made 10 of them. And I think until 3 of them got destroyed. One got destroyed in the flood. One got chopped up in Japan and so forth. So there's only like 7. And this is probably the best looking console as far as a console ever made. And Rupert Neve designed this console. He designed this preamp called the Focusrite ISA 110. And Jack Pewitt swears by this preamp. It's a Rupert Neve. So, everyone knows about Rupert Neve with the 1073, the 1081, the 1084, which is basically preamp with EQs, right? Channel strips. So, and of course, Rupert Neve started the Neve with the vintage Neve, then of course, you know, creating Focusrite, then eventually going to AMEC. This is all before he passed away. If anyone knows about Rupert Neve, you know, so we know Rupert Neve makes top-notch gear. He designs top-notch gear. So I would love to get my hands on the channel strip, simply because those channel, what I like about channel strips is having not only the preamp section, but I also like being able to maybe I need to want to add some compression and things like that before I record. That's the reason why I use the Avalon, because it's a channel strip. So I use some of the compression and stuff like that before I record the vocals. You know, some people chain just a preamp with a separate compressor, but that's how I like to do it. And I would love to see how that, you know, how that sounds, because I've never had any Focusrite. I do have a Focusrite twin track downstairs, which is a really good, it's a Class A preamp, but it's not an ISA one, it's the Twin Track Pro. So I know that's a long answer, but so anyhow, is how am I loving the Adams as far as the studio? Love them. I'm glad I bought them. I'm really, these Adam AH, which stands for, you know, analog 8-inch horizontal, right? Adam AH, 8 H's. So awesome monitor, just like I like my Kali Audios. The Kali Audios, which to me, if you're looking for some really great, affordable, excellent sounding studio monitors, and you know, that's affordable, the Kali Audio. These are, some people's rooms aren't, you know, they probably don't need 8-inch monitors. They might get with the Kali 5s, but these are excellent. They're $499 each, you know, just about $1,000 to get you some really good, great, amazing sounding three-way monitors. And I was like a lot of people, I was mixing on two-way monitors for years. But let me tell you, since I switched to three ways, it's kind of like there's a thing that says once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Now I see why when you go to top-notch studios, why there are some studios that still use two ways, like they might have Genelec 1080, 1031s or whatever, but you'll start to see some like that have like Dynaudio three ways, or the ATCs, at least the SCM 25As or whatever, three-way monitors. Let me tell you, the mid-range with a lot of those studio monitors, they say most of the time, either when people mix or whatever, they're either high end, it's too bright, they're low end, it's too bassy, but most people mess up the mid-range out of all of it. This is the reason why Yamaha NS10s were so popular, because they were a mid-range focused monitor. And they said if you get the mid-range right, this is why people love to mix on NS10s. Well, if you have a combination of all three, you could hear. I was like, I would go back and listen to some of the mixes. I was like, I didn't hear some of these frequencies. Let me go back and redo some of these frequencies on these monitors, or some of these mixes that I was doing. Like, now I know what I want to do, how I'm going to actually EQ the piano and make my adjustments that I didn't hear before. So that's the reason why I got the Kalis and really hear it on these Adams. So that makes sense. So anyone that can go from a two-way to a three-way, I think you'll be happy to do that. So okay, let's see. The three-way Focal. I was looking at the Focal, the trios. But like I said, I came across the Adams. When I was listening to Adams, I fell in love with those. So that's why I bought them. But I was looking at the Focals too. That was another studio set of mod three ways I was looking at. So Dave said, check out Andrew Chapman's video last week on preamps. I grew some of the ranking. Okay, I'm gonna check it out. It says Rockport tickets. Do I run multiple monitors at the same time? And so which ways? Actually, I don't. I just A B 3. Like I got these Alesis Monitor ones, which is basically they're focused, they're mid-range focused they're like they were a more affordable version of the Yamaha NS10s. They have that same type of range. So I'll listen to stuff on the Monitors one, because before I had the JBL 305s, I had the Behringer Truths and all that for a long time. But yeah, these when I got the Calis, that just changed my focus when I started listening to stuff on the Calis. And then I started listening to stuff on the Adams. I'm like, yeah, okay. Not going back to, there was a thing where what you upgrade in your recording studios. Like what are the things you should always upgrade in your recording studio? Mic pre's, microphones, monitors. So I would, in that order. so um so that makes sense. Oh, yep. Man, just a baller. But people think they see him, they watch. He said, "I'm a baller." Believe it or not, it's the reason why I work. I save my checks because I'm focus dependent on what I want to get, so I save my checks. That's all it is. I still work, so trust me, this stuff doesn't come. Plus, I'm a bargain shopper. So let me see. Oh, he said Maddie says, yeah, Maddie's saying, man, you always got the good stuff. Well, Maddie, Man Network has 25 recording studios. Y'all know that, right? He owns Blackbird and I'm teasing. I'm teasing, man. So okay, and so gotcha. Okay, Stewie, what is my take on Suno? It's amazing. It does anything for your lyrics. Super. I'm not familiar with Suno, so I'm not really familiar with that. So, oh, man says I mean ballers a combo. I appreciate it. A lot of hard work, a lot of saving and so forth. But yeah. Oh, man says it's 30 studios now, Mark. Get it right. Right. Yep. He owns Ocean Way of Nashville. And I'm joking. So Horse says Ramen Studio Baller here. Gotcha. Oh, it says, man, we're Suno the AI. Yeah, I'm not familiar with Suno. I don't know if that's an AI. I'm really skeptical on AI stuff. I was watching a bunch of TikTok videos, and AI is so scary now. They got videos where latest AI video, I've been watching 3 of them. One is this dog. It's a Chihuahua barking at this like cane Corsa. And it's like, doing that until they open the door. And then it just, that's AI. It's not real, right? Another